Welcome to everyone who's gathered here this evening, and welcome to everyone that is joining us online. My name is Joanne Johnson, and tonight we'll be performing the duties of co-chair. Thank you all for being here and taking time out of your schedules to attend the meeting. We have a really good community support tonight, and we are thankful for that. We also want to thank you for your ongoing dedication to the Massey Commission and to the work that we are doing. We are at a crucial juncture in our work, and your presence here today reflects a shared commitment to transparency, to accountability, and to justice. We're going to start our meeting tonight by approving the minutes from our previous meetings. We had 2 meetings in the month of March. We had our regularly scheduled meeting, which was held on March 10th, and then we had a special meeting on March 24th. So before we proceed, we need to approve those minutes from the last 2 meetings. Commissioners, you have had the opportunity to review the meeting minutes from our March meetings. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion? Okay, Bob Wesley, Brianna. All in favor, say aye. The motion is approved. Now we'll move on to a motion to pass the March 24th special meeting minutes to confirm the new staff positions. Can I get a motion to approve those meetings? Okay, Kristen, and second? Okay, Veronica. All in favor, say aye. Aye. That motion is also approved. Now we're going to move on to work group reports and comments. I will ask each work group's co-lead to give a brief presentation about what was covered in their previous meetings. We'll start with Sunshine Clemens, who is the co-lead of the Law Enforcement Hiring, Training, Wellness, and Cultural Competency Group.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Our work group met on April the 7th at UIS. We had 2 presentations from subject matter experts related to alternatives to policing. The first one was Alex Vitale, who's an author and a professor of sociology. And the second was STAR, which stands for the Support Team Assisted Response. And they are, for those who are familiar with the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon, which has been mentioned a few times, STAR is an identical program that is run out of Denver, Colorado. So we had a presentation from both of those parties. They provided some important information on how the STAR program is run, how they got started, how they're funded, and provided some metric data to verify the success of their program. And I think it was really beneficial to our work group because I genuinely believe that if we had a program like that here in Springfield, that had been able to respond to Sonia Massey, I believe that she would be alive. I believe if we had a program like that that was able to respond to Gregory Small Jr., I believe that he would not have been shot by police. So I feel like it's a really vital tool, and I think they gave us really good information for how we can implement something like that here in our city. And our next meeting is scheduled for May the 5th at 5:30 at CAP 1908, which is located at 1100 South Grand Avenue. If there are any updates on our location change, they will be shared on the Massey Commission Facebook page. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunshine. Brian Wohicki is our co-lead for the Integrated Mental Health Services and Emergency Response Subcommittee. He was not able to be here with us tonight, so Dr. Cruz will be reading his remarks.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Wojcicki's report. Our last monthly meeting included guests with direct knowledge and oversight of the statewide implementation of the Community Emergency Services and Supports Act, CESA, this summer, which is focused on non-law enforcement behavioral health responses. This will involve the coordination of 988 Services, Mobile Crisis Response Team, and 911 dispatch. Details of the presentation and discussion were included in the work group's quarterly report. Our next work group meeting will be focused on the Justice Collaboratory Report and compiling a list of local mental health resources and organizations in order to partner more with the Community Education Work Group. For subsequent meetings, outreach has been done to hear from guests about local services related to Adult Redeploy Illinois and Memorial's Crisis Response Team.
Okay, and Brian wanted to share that their next meeting is scheduled for April 28th at CAP 1908. Next, we'll move on to Kristen Rubelke, Community Education on Public Health and Safety.
Thank you. The Community Education on Public Health and Safety Work Group met on Saturday, March 29th at 2 p.m. at CAP 1908. This meeting focused primarily on our Massey Commission updates, as we had much to update them on, and the Mental Health Work Group meeting, which we also attended, and our 6-month work group report. During the second half of the meeting, the work group split into sub-working groups of the 4 different areas of focus. These are 911 dispatch, current gaps and trends, Know Your Rights campaigns, and mental health and trauma in the community. These working groups were thoughtful about what research and other steps need to be taken to accomplish our work group's goal. We're looking to have a couple different presenters at the next meeting, Gail Neely with the Springfield Resiliency Initiative, and George Camacho, the Justice Collaborative. We will also be entertaining a recommendation that, if approved, will be brought to the commission as a whole. The Community Education on Public Health and Safety Work Group will meet again on Saturday, April 26th at 2 p.m. at CAP 1908.
Thank you. And lastly, we will hear from Veronica Espina, Economic Disparities and Accessibility Group.
Thank you. So we met on the 7th, April 7th at Resource 1. We talked about, we summarized the 7 areas that we are researching in which we have had experts. And in that particular meeting, we have 2 elder people. We have Alderman Sean Gregory and Alderwoman Jennifer Notoriano. And we covered different issues related to income inequality, home ownership, and civic participation in the most impoverished neighborhoods of Springfield, including North and East Side. It was a conversation about how at the city level, so I'm specifically talking about city council, grants are determined and awarded. And we also talk about with both this issue of freedom of speech that some of our residents in Springfield feel compelled to pay attention to because they're having problems when they go to certain instances and city council meetings to speak and have time to present their ideas. We also talk about a civility pledge at city council and why 2 older people didn't sign up. So it was a very, very rich conversation on economic disparities, perceived racism, and grant funding. Our next meeting would be Monday, May 5th at the same location, Resource 1 at 6 p.m.
6 p.m. Thank you, Veronica. Now I will invite Veronica to keep the mic to give her comments and set the stage for our speakers that we will be having this evening.
The heartbreaking loss of Sonia Massey is the reason we are here, and we hold her name, her memory, and her family with us as we begin this work. This commission was formed in direct response to her death, and that truth will remain central to everything we do. At the same time, we recognize that what happened to Sonia did not occur in isolation. It was the result of deeper, long-standing systemic issues that affect how our communities experience safety, access, dignity, and care. We're not looking away from Sonia's murder. We're looking more closely at it with a wider lens to understand all of the systems and circumstances that made it possible. This is why this commission is taking a broader and interconnected approach. We know that law enforcement practices, mental health crisis response, public trust, community education, economic disparities, and access to services are not separate issues. They are deeply intertwined. The way someone is treated during a 911 call is connected to how officers are trained and supported, to whether culturally competent and trauma-informed responses are in place, to the availability of community resources, and to whether someone has historically been denied access to care, safety, or opportunity. Each one of our work groups holds a vital piece of this larger puzzle. By addressing these systems together, we hope to create change that is not just reactive, but preventive. Change that not only seeks justice for Sonia, but ensures her legacy lives on through safer, more just structures for everyone. This is the work we're committed to doing with care, courage, and accountability.
Thank you, Veronica. Okay. At this time, I'd like to share a little bit about each of tonight's speakers and point you towards their longer biographies that are located within the 6-month progress report. Dr. Wendi El-Amin. Dr. Wendi El-Amin is the Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at SIU School of Medicine and a faculty member in Family and Community Medicine. A passionate advocate for health equity, she brings decades of experience in medicine, education, and community engagement, from private practice to leadership roles at the University of Virginia. She is board certified in family medicine and serves on several community boards. A mother of 3, Dr. Wendi is known for her fierce commitment to justice, healing, and creating inclusive spaces. Next, we have Dr. Daniel Mahony. Dr. Mahony is the 10th president of the Southern Illinois University System. Since beginning his tenure in 2020, he's championed student-centered, transparent, and equity-driven leadership. Prior to SIU, he served as president of Winthrop University and held academic leadership roles at Kent State and the University of Louisville. Dr. Mahony is deeply committed to inclusion, strategic growth, and academic excellence. Lastly, we have Dr. Shreepada Tripathy. Dr. Tripathy is an associate professor of clinical pediatrics at SIU School of Medicine, a pediatric hospitalist, and a leader in health equity and data science. He holds advanced degrees in medicine, business, and strategic analytics, and serves as president of the Sangamon County Medical Society. Originally from Texas, Dr. Tripathy is board certified in both general pediatrics and pediatric hospital medicine. The commission looks forward to hearing from you and turn the floor over to our presenters. Dr. Mahoney is going to be first. Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the commission for all the work that you're doing. Now, obviously, there's a lot of good work going on here. We do appreciate this as a member of the Springfield community. I really admire everything that you're doing. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight about something that's important to me to discuss, which is disparities in higher education and certainly some of the potential solutions. So go on to the next slide. Actually, I think. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got it. Okay. So as a son of a history teacher, I always believe you got to start with history because you can't decide how we're going to deal with things today unless you know how we got here. And so if you look at higher education, the original purpose of higher education in the United States is not anywhere close to what it is today. Our early institutions, Harvard, Yale, and others, were set up for one demographic group only. It was set up for rich white males, and its purpose was to create English gentlemen on the American frontier. That was its goal. It was not broad in who it attracted, nor broad in its mission. Now, we start to see significant changes in the 1800s. The Morrill Act of 1862 created the land-grant institutions, which were very agriculture engineering focused, so we start to see more of that focused on career preparation. The 1890 institutions were the HBCU institutions that were created very similar to the ones created in 1862. But we see a lot of institutions growing for a lot of different reasons. We see a lot of what they called normal schools, which was teacher preparation. We saw religious schools, mostly Christian schools, but different denominations, each wanting their own institutions. We see women's colleges, we see HBCUs, and a variety of other private institutions. What you see is that one, college wasn't for everyone, and two, it really was very segregated. Based on gender, based on religion, based on race. So we see a lot of segregation in early American higher education. One of the big changes was the GI Bill, which came after World War II, which provided opportunities for poor kids to go to college who may not have had that opportunity otherwise. So we started to expand who goes. My dad was one of 6 boys. 4 of them went to college on the GI Bill. So that was a relatively common way. I will say there were racial differences in how the GI Bill was used. About 28% of the white soldiers used the GI Bill to go to college compared to 12% of the black soldiers. A lot of that was actually set up intentionally, particularly in the South and other parts, to actually limit the use by black soldiers. So it was not equitable across races, but it did open up opportunities for people. You start to see increased integration in institutions in the 1960s, 70s, both racial integration and gender integration. One of the things that Title IX, and I've talked to some of the people who are actually behind the Title IX movement, it had nothing to do with sports, despite what everybody now probably thinks. It was really because they were turning down white women and women in general over men who had less qualifications for college admission. So it was actually providing them the same opportunity to go to college with the same qualifications. And so that's really the impetus behind Title IX. Through all this, we start to see actually institutions become more integrated, not completely, but more integrated than they had been before, which led to a lot of the DEI initiatives, and really was an attempt to try to create an opportunity for people who were in a new environment where they may not have seen a lot of people like them, who may have felt out of place, to actually feel included, have the supports that they needed. I will say, even as we see this, though, our employees, and this is data from today, have not radically changed. We still tend to be overly white and overly male. If you look at my position of university president, 72% are white. Keep in mind, in the last census, 59% of the population was identified as white. About 28% were identified as white male. So when you look at these numbers, 72% white, 67% male, 46% white males. So again, way overrepresented compared to the representation of the population. On top of that, where I say they're more non-traditional, which means that they didn't go through the pathway that normally you go through to get to be president. So when we talk about being able to get there without actually paying your dues through the process, if that happens, it's almost always white males. The group that's least likely to get that opportunity are black females. Black females almost always have to go through the normal process to get there. Medical school deans also tend to be overwhelmingly white and male. University senior leadership. Faculty also tend to be overly white and overly male. 39% are white males. If you look at full professors at the highest rank, over half of them are white males. So they're actually educating a far more diverse student body than we had before, but they are not really representative of the student body that they're educating. That hasn't changed. And I will say they talk about trying to get to something that looks similar to the population. Even if we were to increase the rate that faculty is becoming more diverse by 3.5 times the current rate, it would take us another quarter century to get there. And there is really no chance that we're going to increase it by that rate that quickly. So when people say nationally that we've gone too far on DEI, and I look at this data, I have no idea what they're talking about. That does not match the reality. We are still overwhelmingly white and still overwhelmingly male in who we employ. Next slide. Oh, sorry, keep forgetting this. Equity gaps. So we see equity gaps, and this is Illinois' data, but we would see this in across the country in different ways. And I use mostly the public four-year rates, but if we looked at private institutions, if we looked at community colleges, we would see the same things. The numbers might be a little bit different, but the gaps would be pretty much the same. And so we look at attainment of a bachelor's degree, or in the parentheses, bachelor's plus associates, you can see the massive difference between Asian achievement, white achievement, and Latinx and African American achievement. So there's a large gap there. When we look, and it goes back to what happens through the process to get to graduation, retention is first-year retention. So it's the percentage of students that start in one fall and come back for a second year. You see, again, large gaps there. If we look, for example, between white population and African-American population, it's almost 20% is the gap. What is frankly just as alarming, if not more so, is the advancement rates. Advancement rates is the percentage of students who start in one fall and are a sophomore the next year. If they don't achieve sophomore status in their second year, their chances of graduating goes down dramatically. The cost of achieving a degree is probably going to go up dramatically because even if they do graduate, it's going to take them longer. Look at the percentages for African Americans versus white students on that advancement rate, 28% versus 70%. That's a massive gap that we have here in Illinois. And again, not surprisingly, when we look at graduation rates, that gap that we had in retention rates of 20% actually goes up to 32% between white population and African American. We see similar issues with Latinx. We see similar issues with Pell Grant students. So we see gaps throughout the entire higher education system. So if we go on to the next slide, why do we have these gaps? And there's multiple reasons for the gaps. Number one, what we see is inequity and segregation in K-12. So it starts before it even gets to higher education. We see this, the funding differences in American K-12 education are enormous. Poorer districts have far less funding than more affluent districts do. I had a chance when I was an education dean to go visit Ontario. Ontario is fascinating. Every school district gets the same budget. Poor, rich, everybody gets the same budget. They get the same expectations for their students. And I'll get to later, they have incredibly low gaps between the highest achieving and the lowest achieving students, in part because they actually funded to take away some of those inequities. And so again, that's one issue. Another is issue to access to college credit, whether that's dual credit, dual enrollment, AP, IB. We see massive differences in that throughout Illinois, where those in poorer districts have less access to get college credit. The reason that's critically important, both my children had one semester of college credit before they started college. There was zero chance that they were not going to achieve sophomore status by their second year, unless they really, really bombed down. That would have been a whole other issue for us. But they were going to get that sophomore status because they came in with a semester worth of classes, and it wasn't that hard for them to get that. In Illinois, we find lots of places that basically are college credit deserts in their high schools. They do not have access to it, so they start off with zero. On top of that, sometimes they're going to be placed in developmental ed, which means they don't get any credit for the classes they're taking, which again adds to that problem of them not getting to that second year and slows down the process to getting towards graduation. A lot of that, again, is tied to how we fund K-12 schools in the United States. And there's been a general failure, frankly, to acknowledge the data on K-12 education. I graduated from high school in 1983, and in 1983, a report came out from the Reagan administration called Nation at Risk. And what Nation at Risk said is our K-12 system was failing in the United States, that the rest of the world was going to take us over. See a couple heads nodding who remember that report. It came out the year I graduated. I remember two things really have stuck with me with that. One is, I went to a pretty good high school. I didn't think I was ill-prepared for college. I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. Second thing was that we're now, 40-some years later, and we haven't fallen behind the rest of the world. That was not the real reason why we saw some of the gaps we saw in test scores between us and other countries. And I will tell you, I had a student who actually did his dissertation on this. They knew at the time what the problem was. It had nothing to do with the failing American K-12 system. It had to do with inequities in how we funded and how we supported K-12 education. Because when you look at the reality between rich and poor schools, if you look just at those schools with a low percentage of poor students, they are the top in the world. They achieve at levels that exceed every other country in the world. But our gap between the highest achievers and the lowest achievers is about twice the world average. We have a huge equity gap at the K-12 level. We have failed to, for 40-some years, acknowledge that that exists and acknowledge the fact that it's tied back to how we fund education at the K-12 level and the inequities that exist there, because that's an inconvenient truth, using Al Gore's words, and we don't want to acknowledge that that exists, but that is the reality, and we've known it for a long, long period of time. And recently, we went through the COVID crisis, all of which I will tell you is going to exacerbate all of these problems. It's just going to make those gaps worse. And we're already starting to see that in some of the data. Third thing is the cost of higher education, and frankly, the misinformation on the rising cost. How many people in this room think the cost of higher education has gone up in the last decade? And you've heard this, right, over and over again? Completely false. That is not true. And there's national data to show you that it's not true. Cost of tuition and fees has actually gone up less than the inflation rate, and that's the published tuition and fees, which only about 20% of our students pay. 80% of our students get some aid. If you look at the net tuition and fees, it is cheaper to go to college than it was 10 years ago. It's gone down. And I don't mean in present value dollars, I mean in actual dollars. The check you will write is smaller today on average than it was 10 years ago. And in fact, it's not radically different than what my parents would have paid for me in the 1980s to go to college. It has not gone up. Now, why do we keep hearing that it's gone up? One is because the media often reports on the published rates, which have gone up, and they usually use a period that makes it seem like it's much worse than it is, because it's a good story and it's a good narrative. Second thing is, it doesn't mean that going to college is cheap. Part of the issue for a lot of our students, well, I always say what I pay for my daughter isn't much different than what parents paid for me. What I pay for her rent and food is dramatically different than what my parents paid for me. And that has nothing to do with going to college. It's simply the fact that housing and food costs have gone up dramatically in the last 40 years. And if you go away for college, that's a big cost. And that's where students often struggle. So it's not to say there's not problems for students. The problem is not really in tuition and fees. The other problem is they don't know this. We have a poor job in higher education of explaining there are lots of ways to get a great college education relatively inexpensively, but we haven't done a good job of promoting that, frankly, at all. And I'll give you a real quick example. Chancellor Minor, our chancellor at the SIUE campus, tells a story. He was talking with a student from East St. Louis. He said, where are you going to college? Clearly coming to SIUE, you got to be coming to our place, right? And he goes, no, I'm going to this out-of-state institution. And he goes to their parents, like, how are you going to pay for it? Like, we don't know, but it's a lot of money. We'll figure something out. He said, could you apply to SIUE? Let's just see what happens. He's I think a junior now, actually, at SIUE. He's going for free. It costs him nothing, but they didn't know that. So we've done a really poor job of telling students exactly what it's going to cost you at different places, so they make bad financial decisions, get themselves in debt where they actually could go to college for a lot less if they actually knew what was available. But we got 4,000 institutions, all of which have different tuition rates and all of which have different discount rates. And every student is different. And that's really hard to communicate. So we haven't done a good job on that. Next thing is the deficit mindset. Again, what we see a lot of times in higher education is that we believe once our students are not good from the beginning, that they're not capable. We go back often to number one. Well, I talked about the inequities that exist in K-12. I will often hear faculty say, what are we going to do? The K-12 system didn't prepare them. It's kind of a lost situation. It's not. I can tell you I've been teaching for over 3 years. I can count on one hand and have finger left how many students I did not think were capable of graduating from college with the right supports. Almost all of them are capable if they get to us. The fact is we don't often believe that they are, and then we do things to reinforce kind of their own insecurities sometimes and own deficit mindset. So we have that problem. And then there's a general lack of understanding of what other people are experiencing. One of the great stories I heard, not great stories, but I think a story that tells you what's going on it was about a single mother taking a math class when she was trying to go back to school, get her college degree, and the professor was going to fail her because she missed too many classes. She had an A on every test. A lack of recognition that her situation was different, but that she was actually learning the material. That makes no sense to do that, but we often set up rules without understanding. But again, keep in mind, most of our faculty come from those elite institutions. In fact, I think it's 20% of the faculty come from 8 schools. Harvard is being one of them, Stanford being another one. So they're not necessarily well equipped to understand naturally the situation that most of our students are facing. Last is a lack of belonging. There's a really great book by Jeffrey Cohen talking about belonging and how much of a difference that makes in student success, particularly when you go into some place where fewer people look like you don't have that sense of belonging. We find this particularly affects Black female students who feel like they don't belong whatever institution that they're at. They don't have faculty who look like them. Again, lots of research on the presence of Black faculty and how much of a difference that makes for Black students, but sometimes they may go through their whole education and have none. And that's another issue that we're trying to address. And the fact is, all of our students need some level of support. It's just different, the support that they need. And what we need to be able to do is target that support. It was interesting, recently I was just happened to be on social media site, and it was talking about shutting down a Black student center at another university based on everything that's happening at the federal level. And one of the young women who commented talked about the Black Cultural Center at Virginia Tech and how that made the difference, all the difference in the world. I was actually a student government leader when we put the Black Cultural Center 40 years ago. And the reason we pushed for it is because the students said, we don't feel like we see people like us around. We need a place to go to in this primarily white community at this primarily white school. So it's actually very nice to have that reinforcement that the thing we pushed for 40 years ago made such a difference for that student. But we have to be able to continue to do that. And right now there's a national push against doing any of that. So last slide, and then I'll answer any questions. Potential solutions. First of all, we have to acknowledge the data I just presented. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. We can't present or kind of accept that these racial equity gaps are not there. We need to actually look at the data and then actually use it to come up with solutions. And sometimes those solutions can be very simple. Georgia State has done a really great job with looking at their data and figuring out what's going wrong. And sometimes it was as simple as students were filling out the FAFSA and they got to a point where they didn't know how to complete it and they just gave up. So they found a way to work around that, or they didn't have their vaccination records. And so they set up a vaccination clinic or vaccination truck on campus during orientation week. They did all these things to kind of overcome some of the gaps that were there. But first of all, you have to acknowledge that the data actually exists. We have to continue to try to find ways to reduce costs. And I'm not advocating for SIU, but I will say we do have a Saluki and SIUE commitment, which one of them is $103,000 and one of them is $113,000. If your family makes less than that, and have under $50,000 in assets, you can go for free. And we probably have several hundred students every incoming class who take advantage of that. It also applies to transfer students. So those coming from community colleges can also take advantage of that. I will say, while I'm presenting ours, because I know it well, almost every school in the state now has some sort of commitment. So these things are relatively common. But I'm guessing most of you don't know that this actually exists. In fact, I teach class still, and in my class a couple weeks ago, they were talking about Harvard has done the same thing for anybody under 200,000. And again, most people don't know that that exists. And I said, well, do you know SIUE has the same thing? This was a class at SIUE. Not a single student in my class actually knew this existed. And this is at our own institution. So trying to get that information out has been really challenging for higher education institutions. The Saluki Step Ahead is where you actually can get a 4-year degree at a community college without ever leaving and get that degree from SIU. We provide a scholarship in the last 2 years, which reduces the cost. And again, if you're one of those students who's on Pell Grants, gets MAP funding, you're going for free. So even with the $4,000 scholarship probably isn't necessary to get you through, but it can get you through without you having to leave. So it focuses on the place-bound students. Next is we got to find a way to reduce the time to degree. We need to close a lot. We need to really be providing more opportunities to get college credit before they get to us. Again, if they come in with 6, 9, 12 hours, their chances of success are much, much higher than they are right now. And again, we end up saving them a lot of money. We need to communicate that. I will say there's a direct admissions bill right now going through the Illinois legislature, which would directly admit students who meet our qualifications into our institution. I like that in part because it allows us to contact them right away and get those financial aid packages to them. And they may end up finding that whether it's Western, Eastern, Northern, wherever it may be, Chicago State, they may have a better deal in one of those places than we realized. And so I think that would help a lot. Increasing the growth mindset of our faculty is really important. And we've actually got a grant from the Lumina Foundation we're working with our faculty on a whole lot of training, changing some of the ways that they're doing it. Again, the research shows overwhelmingly that the growth mindset of the faculty member is more important than the student's growth mindset. So if faculty members believe in them, it's more important than if they even believe in themselves. And so changing that growth mindset is really important. I tell the story. It's actually interesting. When we look at those equity gaps, Education Trust did a report a few years ago, and they found that there were only 10 institutions that had no equity gap for Black students. In other words, there was only 10 institutions where the Black students were not graduating at a lower rate. One of those was my institution, Winthrop University. And I will take no credit for it because this existed long before I got there. And I will tell you, Winthrop University had very little money. We took students from South Carolina, which I think ranks like 45 in education in the K-12 system. Most of our students were coming from there. A lot from an area that's so underfunded that's referred to as the corridor of shame. and yet we were achieving at a higher level. And I will tell you, the only reason that happened was because every faculty member believed every student could be successful. And that permeated the place, and they set high standards for students, and students lived up to those standards, in part because the faculty really, truly believed in them. I've never seen a place kind of quite like that. And then we need targeted support, and that's for every group. This is veterans, this is different racial groups, this is everybody needs different types of support, and we need to be able to be freed up to provide that support that they need, whatever that is, because it's all about the students actually achieving the goal of a college degree. And we actually have all kinds of different programs we have been starting the last couple of years, summer programs that allow students to get some college credit in the summertime, get them adjusted to college better. All of those things can make a difference. So there's a lot of things we can do, but a lot more we need to do, because again, those gaps are still enormous here in Illinois. So that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes.
So my question is the reduce the time to degree.
Yeah.
I like that idea, but then when I think about, so my kids, I have one at Springfield High School. I have one that graduated from Springfield High School. They are drastically different academically, personality, everything. So for my daughter that's there right now, she takes the middle of the road classes. So to say that if we could make accessible to all kids college credit early on, how does that work for the kids that are just in the middle of the road classes? Because my older daughter did take a class at Lincoln Land while she was at SIU. So when she went off to college, she did have some of those credits already. But is that really accessible to all kids if they're at different learning levels?
Yeah, and again, not every solution is going to be right for every kid, but I will say the high school my kids went to, very racially diverse, very socioeconomically diverse, and they will tell you the kids who were in that class with them when they did like kind of the dual credit were very diverse, and some of them were not ones who necessarily even knew they were going to go to college, but the fact that they got through that class successfully with the right teacher in the right situation actually encouraged them to go to college. In fact, there's actually a good bit of data that it doesn't necessarily encourage them to go to the college that gave them the credit. It does encourage them to go to college
Just in general.
So it does actually help kind of break down that barrier of maybe I don't think I'm a college student. It actually helps. And particularly for the middle of the road student, it can be helpful there.
Yes. Thank you.
So going backwards to like K-12.
Yeah.
I've been researching and lobbying against school ticketing in Illinois because that's something that happens a lot in Northern Illinois. And it's predominantly in Black neighborhoods or in poorer school systems. And it's something that really affects the future of these children. So I don't know if that's something you have any background in educating yourself with, or if you have. I guess my question is, how would you suggest we look into these different disciplinary actions that children are receiving that is making it harder for them to feel like they're supported in school, and kind of really dampers them for their entire life and kind of already labels them as a bad kid before they even have a chance to discover who they are?
Yeah, I think it's, again, I didn't get into everything. It is one of the other issues we see. You're right, exactly. It ends up, any of the data you look at on a disciplinary, it's not equitable across all socioeconomic groups. It's not equitable across all racial groups. There's definitely a huge difference. Black males, at least what I've seen, largely are the ones who are most often disciplined. And we know that, again, those actions often lead to discouraging, like just as you're talking about going to college. How do you solve that problem? I don't know, but I think it's working on, the first step is actually recognizing that you have that problem. And again, I'll go back to again and again, my biggest concern right now as a country is we're trying to pretend that none of that is happening. And once you start to pretend that that's not happening, then you can't start to address solutions. You're ignoring the reality that there's a racial difference in how we discipline kids in the K-12 system.
Veronica? Do you have one? It's not coming through.
Oh, there.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
It's getting a difficult spot today, considering that our F1 visa international students are getting their visas revoked. in 2 universities in town. So let me explain. In 2017, when we failed to pass as a city a welcoming city resolution to give the message of welcoming to international students, immigrants, and so on, the School of Medicine had a huge drop in enrollment from international students. So did UIS. And so were all the universities, including Ivy League universities, that lost these tuition dollars that, if you don't know, we international students, I used to be, right, pay 3 times more in tuition than the domestic one. Therefore, we subsidize domestic grants. So it's really important to think about these tuition dollars that we are losing if we don't care about the moral issue that is behind this, right? Just think about the finances. So that's one really important thing that, in my mind, our universities should be telling everyone, right? Why are we not keeping our international students? And what's going to happen is what happened in 2017. In that term, which is our current term president, our international students went to Canada and Australia because they felt safer there. So that's what's going to happen again here. So I want you to think about that and the message that we can give our students that are witnesses and affected parties to this. And second, that is so important that we get this message right, because right now we have first and second generation immigrant students in every campus in the United States that are afraid to go to class. The first generation may have, the status to go to class. The second generation that was born in the US, right, are concerned about going back and forth to their parents' home to see if they're safe. So you're going to have absences. How are you treating the student absences, right? Which leads me to faculty training. We need more faculty training. I remember that at UIS, at some point, I heard some of my colleagues talking about the COVID grades, and I was infuriated about this lack of compassion that these were inflated grades, but really Latinos were most affected in Cook County with COVID deaths. So for us to talk about COVID grades was really an insult toward Latino students that apparently had inflated grades because they have more absences, but they still pass the class. That is the mentality that doesn't help us as faculty. So I really want to ask you to, and I know you're doing a good job, especially at the School of Medicine, pay a little bit more attention at the student mental health on campus, international student, first and second generation, and the training of faculty. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will say those are 2 things we've been focused on and communicating a lot with our international students, particularly right now, that happening on all of our campuses pretty regularly. And I agree with you on the faculty training, and this gets back to just another example of where understanding a student's situation doesn't necessarily, again, if they're missing class or there's something going on in their lives, realizing that's going to affect their performance and how do you help them do as well as they can. I will say, one of the things with faculty you have to remember is none of us were trained to be teachers. Doctoral programs do not train you to teach at all. And then all of a sudden they give you 5 classes to teach your first year, at least they did me, and no preparation to do that. And so I always look back at my first year and say, some of my instincts were right and some of them were dead wrong. I wish someone had kind of given me some more training early on, so I wouldn't have made as many mistakes as I did. Again, some of the faculty are very well-meaning, but have not been prepared. I will say the nice thing is the training we've been providing through the grant we have with the Lumina Foundation, faculty have been really good about wanting that training. So I think there's a desire for it among faculty, which I think is a positive first step.
Kristen? Oh, wait, who? What?
I know you were talking about the DEI initiative. I know on the federal level, a lot of that has been cut. President Trump is trying to do away with it. But how is it affecting your school as well as other schools as well? And with it affecting, if it does, which I'm pretty sure it probably does, if we were to have another president, I mean, how far do you think that this would set the country back?
again, I'll go back to what I talked about earlier. Well, two things I would say. One is every state's a little bit different. I couldn't be happier to be in Illinois at this moment because I'm able to continue to do things that if I was in pretty much every other state I have ever worked in, I would not be able to do right now. And talked with people in those other states, and they are trying to find ways to do things without really saying. But once you start closing those centers, again, gathering spaces is critically important to people. You simply can't do the things that you've done before. I'm very concerned about what the impact will be for the long term, and all of those equity caps that we talked about could grow even larger for all of this. So it's I think a huge concern at this moment.
Okay. Another question too. Would you say that being in this state, you're kind of pretty much protected by the current governor?
Not completely. So again, so does it affect anything that we're doing? Yes, we lost several grants for a simple reason of, for example, it would say, we're going to try to recruit for this program high school students who are highly qualified and underrepresented. You said underrepresented, you can't do that. And we'll lose grant. So that is absolutely happening. There's nothing the governor can do about pulling back a federal grant. So that is happening right now.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kristen.
First of all, I want to say thank you for this slideshow and starting with the history. I think that was really important, and it really sets the stage for where we're at right now. First question, are these slides going to be available to us afterwards?
They have them, so yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that would be fantastic for some of our working groups.
And I will say, if there's ever a group anybody wants me to present to, I'm always willing to do this presentation again if you think there's somebody else who would like to hear it. So
That'd be wonderful.
Go
Wonderful.
ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, we may want you to. So, second, just in recognition of the programs that you mentioned, the different programs for support for students, especially first generation students, is extremely important to their success. I know that Aurora University has an excellent program that really helps students succeed there, and I am so grateful that you mentioned that, and I hope that we can move forward with that as well. One other thing that since we mentioned being grateful for being in the state of Illinois, Governor Pritzker mentioned a priority of his is community college baccalaureate programs. What do you think about those as a potential solution?
yeah, I think it depends on how they're done, to be honest with you. So we've been in discussions on those. If all we're doing is duplicating programs and hitting the same audience, we have the danger of actually reducing funding for all of our institutions. I think particularly the Chicago area institutions could be heavily affected by that. So I think there's some concerns in how it might be implemented. So we've talked a lot about not duplicating things we're already doing and actually expanding opportunities. And so if we're talking about expanding opportunities, that's good. If we're just simply duplicating what the four-year institutions can already do, I'm not sure that adds a lot of value. So we've been trying to find something, I think, and we've been working with the governor's office on finding something that will actually work for everybody. I will say part of this Lukey step ahead, again, they're at almost every community college in Illinois now and offer 12 bachelor's degree programs. So when people say you can't get a bachelor's degree on a community college campus, that is simply not true. You can stay there, finish your degree there. Accounting, nursing, early childhood, all of those things are available through that program.
Thank you.
Dr. Cruz.
Dr. Mahony, thank you for the great presentation. I'd like to make some comments that relate to a couple of things that you said and add to what Commissioner Roberts said in the first question. So you said sometimes it's more important that the faculty believe in them than they believing in themselves. I think a lot of the time they can't believe in themselves. It's something that we've taken a look at a lot, imposter syndrome. It has roots everywhere, as a matter of fact, but goes back to the differential discipline that Brianna talked about as well. And I think that this is completely relevant to what this commission is doing as we address the piece of our work that tries to get moving the culture change that's necessary. So going back to K through K-12 and all kinds of different things where these things are occurring and engaging the right groups is important. Example is indeed African American and Black men who for decades, as we've noticed, have been less likely than before to go into science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine, and really needs some special focus. The second thing was your comments about lack of belonging and loneliness. In our medical school, I've noticed that students from underrepresented groups, even those most engaged and most outgoing, at the end of their training, sometimes will say they felt lonely, and I've been flabbergasted by that. It made me, step back, and it opened my eyes for sure. And so this is something I think that Springfield as a community should open their eyes to, and really, really take a good look at trying to study this intentionally and understanding what might be helpful. And maybe at our next meeting in May, we're going to see some recommendations for that as well. And then I would just like to comment to the entire commission and reiterate what Joanne said to begin with. The visionary leadership that you've provided for the SIU system. Dr. Mahony established the Office of Anti-Racism, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the SIU system and hired the first vice president for anti-racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion, Sheila Caldwell, who's in the front row tonight. It's been transformative for the system and is recognized and is starting to get to some of these root problems. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll say just one thing on one of the things you mentioned about the imposter syndrome. One of the other things we learned in Ontario, which was really interesting, is, in America, we like to grade schools. So A schools, F schools, all of this. They don't do that at all, because they're like, what are we telling a student who graduated from an F school? You're not capable of going to college. So a lot of the ways we've evaluated our K-12 schools have really been damaging to a lot of our students in ways that were totally unnecessary. The fascinating thing they do is if a school is not doing well, they look for a school with a similar demographic population that's doing well, and they have them work together. Fascinating idea. Much different than trying to humiliate a school by giving it a bad ranking and really kind of degrading everybody who's in that school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Susan?
Thank you for the presentation. I'm glad we get the slides. I want to go further back in history and take a little bit broader view, partly because of the intro, Veronica, that you provided, and about the way these elements are interrelated and connected. It is an odd thing to me that in the last 10 years, as a pastor, one of the most frequent conversations I've had about disparities relates to Adam Smith. 250 years ago, Scottish guy who invented the field of economics. He was not an economist. It didn't exist in his time. He was actually a professor of moral philosophy. But he wrote this book, Wealth of Nations. And in it, he is the first person to describe capitalism as an economic system. And lots of econ students read the first few chapters where he's describing what it is. Apparently, not very many of us read the concluding chapters where he describes the potential risks and power of a capitalist system. And in those closing chapters, he says that neither the crown nor the church can control a capitalist system. Now, the crown and the church were the two most powerful systems in Europe 250 years ago. Neither of them could control a capitalist system. The only thing that can control a capitalist system and keep it from consuming itself is an educated populace. It gives me chills to think about what we have done to our supposedly universal education system in this country in the last 50 years, 250, 450 years, that I don't think it's accidental that we are here now and we are watching the dismantling of our educational systems. I think it's intentional, and it makes me nervous to say that. Woo, golly, I'm shaking a little bit. But I think that core value of education for everyone, universal education, the idea that every student gets the same resources, What an idea. I wish we would try it.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Mahony. Our next presenters will be Dr. El-Amin and Dr. Tripathy.
Good afternoon. Are you all able to hear me? Can you all hear me now? Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Sonia Massey Commission for giving me the opportunity to talk with you all today. I wish I would have gone first. I have a whole page of notes from everything that you have talked about, and a couple of things that I do want to bring up. One, to what Brianna Roberts talked about with the ticketing system. I think that that's something really important to look at, considering there's been a lot of data around the school to prison pipeline, and looking at how what's happening within the schools plays a tremendous role with the outcomes of where our students are. The other thing is, you talk about not having access to information, and one of the things that we know is that if people don't know that a safety net exists, then it doesn't exist at all. And that's what happens with us not having the right information out. So I've been asked to talk about the social determinants of health, and I'm going to give it to you all from a view as a physician, because this was something that they actually did not talk with us about 30 years ago when I was going through medical school. And I want to frame this in the terms of Dr. Maslow, who was a psychologist, and he talks about there's a hierarchy of needs. When individuals don't have their physiological needs met, they're never going to get to the place of being completely self-actualized. And I think that's important for us to think about. That's housing, that's food security. Safety plays a profound role with us being able to get individuals to their self-actualized self. And when we think about safety, it's not just physical safety, it's also the psychological safety to be able to take risk. Thinking about the social, Dr. Cruz brought up this concept of loneliness. And one of the things that we have recently found is that loneliness is now equated to smoking 16 cigarettes a day. So when we think about the health risk around loneliness and put it in terms of smoking 16 cigarettes a day, we must prioritize how we build greater social connection, because connection does mitigate trauma. And we are in a place right now where we're experiencing different forms of daily trauma, and you cannot get to a place of self-esteem and self-actualization. So I want us to think about the social determinants of health from a physician standpoint. What I do inside my clinic only takes care of 20% of a person's health. The rest of the 80% depends on what zip code they're living in, what type of education they're receiving, whether or not they have opportunities. So when you talk about gap, many times people are calling it the achievement gap. I do believe that it's an opportunity gap, and we need to make sure we're disaggregating the data to find out what people are truly developing opportunities for. Looking at food security, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. So at SIU School of Medicine, one of the things that we try to do is to really find out how a person's social determinants of health has had an impact on their ability to receive health. So I work in the Federally Qualified Health Center. So when our patients come in, we're finding out whether or not they're housed, whether or not they have jobs. We're finding out what their level of education is, because that has a profound role with their health literacy and whether or not they're able to understand the information that we're providing them. Previously, when we were talking about education, there's been a huge emphasis to think about the K through 12, but I want to push us down a little bit deeper. I really believe it starts with what happens in the womb. We need to be thinking about how we're supporting our mothers who are pregnant. And we have found that what happens in the first 1,000 days of a child's life, those first 3 years, are even more critical than what happens to them from K through 12. So the commission has an opportunity to play a role with this as well. So the World Health Association, one of the things that they talk about is the social determinants of health, and the definition. I want to read this. It's those factors impact upon health and well-being, the circumstances into which we are born, grow up, live, work, age, and that includes the health system. But they also go on to say that these circumstances are shaped by the distribution of money, power, and resources at the global, national, local levels, which are themselves influenced by policy choices. So in medicine, we have talked about there are the social determinants of health, but there are also the political determinants of health. And that's why we need to make sure that everybody is going out and voting and really using their agency to make sure that the policies that are in place have the ability to change the social determinants of health. So when we think about disaggregating, normally we think about the social determinants of health in 5 different sections, but I think that we can break it down even more. And that includes our built environment, our neighborhoods, the education, the access, the economic stability, food security, transportation, whether or not our patients can actually get to us, or whether or not they can actually get to their jobs. So that's why we really need to make sure that we have a multidimensional, a multi-sector approach. At SIU School of Medicine, we do something called the problem-based learning, where we set the problem in the center, and then we let people from all different sectors come together to make sure that we are looking at it from all different lenses, and also looking at the childhood experience that our children are having even prior to them getting into the K through 12 system. So I'm going to focus on these 5 different areas, and I'm going to pull out one from each one of these. So when we look at economic stability, many times people are just one paycheck away from being in a dire situation. So when we're thinking about the policies and the safety nets, we need to be thinking about how we can support individuals when they're in their most vulnerable states. When we think about our neighborhood and the physical environment, we do something called the Kennebrew McNeese Forum. And one of the things that we had is a lawyer who came to us several years ago, and she said that here in Springfield, we have one of the highest segregation indexes in the United States. And so what that means is that many people are not proximate to the real experiences that people are having. And that's why forums and commissions are so important, that we're not just getting out the quantitative data, but we're listening to the stories of how our society is landing on individuals. When we think about the education, the early childhood education, we have a paucity of good childcare in this city. So what does that mean? If we don't have childcare, we're going to have individuals who aren't able to even go out to work. If we don't have quality childcare, by the time our children are getting into kindergarten, they're already behind. So this is another issue that I think that we need to pay attention to. And then when we look at the community safety and the social supports, I think that we need to focus also on the exposure to violence, not just what's happening in our community, but what our children are seeing on the news. We need to be very careful that we're paying attention to the vicarious trauma that our students and our children are getting exposure to. So I'm going to flip forward. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, one of the things they talk about are the 5 A's. It's not just about awareness, but it's also how can we adjust what we're already doing? How can we assist our patients to make sure that they're getting access to resources? In one of our most recent community health forums, we had a breakdown where we were also talking about substance use disorders. And I asked the individuals in the room, I said, how many of you all in this room are even aware that we have a substance use program here at SIU School of Medicine? And only 3 people raised their hands. So that's a missed access for people to be able to have, that we need to make sure that we are connecting them with the resources. And also, how can we focus on advocacy and making sure that everything we're doing is alignment, because we don't have capacity to do everything, and we need to make sure that we're breaking outside of the silos. So I wanted to bring your awareness to the 4 issues that we're focusing on around our community health needs assessment, and that's done between St. John's, also Memorial, and SIU School of Medicine. And the 4 areas that we're focusing on are substance use disorder, homelessness, mental health, management of chronic diseases. And a lot of the work that the commission is doing is in alignment with some of these areas. So this is another opportunity for us to build capacity. So I wanted to share with you all some of the solutions that we're focusing on at SIU School of Medicine. One is that we do believe in place-based medicine. So we have something called health depots, and depots is delivering equity places outside of traditional settings where we're going inside of the churches, some of our community organizations, to make sure that we're actually doing screenings in those areas. We have the McNeese Physician Pathway Program, so we're trying to make sure that our students have opportunities to go into healthcare fields, and here they're actually getting exposure to some of the social determinants of health and the problems that we're seeing in the community. We have a Health Equity Scholars Program, so we're actually training the next generation of physicians to understand how equity is giving patients exactly what they need to be able to succeed. We're doing the screenings of the social determinants of health. And then also, when you come into SIU School of Medicine, you have an opportunity to get access to community health workers. And community health workers are individuals who are trusted members of our community that help our patients actually navigate, to provide them the resources, the information, help them navigate our healthcare system. And I think that this is really making a difference. And then the last thing that we're trying to focus on is not just the quantitative data, but the qualitative data. And this is one of the reasons why we have brought in Dr. Tripathy to be a data health equity strategist, to make sure that we are looking at what are some of the drivers of the problems that we have. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Tripathy unless you all have any specific questions for me. Oh. Sunshine.
I do have a question. And I don't almost even know how to, bear with me as I figure out how to ask it. One, thank you for your part of the presentation. April is Minority Health Awareness Month, so this is really a timely presentation. So I appreciate you being here. But you mentioned that really only 20% of a person's like full healthcare needs are like met in the doctor's office. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is like, we're supposed to come up with recommendations, and we know that doing it, like taking care of our unhoused, a lot of the social justice issues are tied into the social determinants of health, but like the city council or the county board, I think those things, they're not looking at it as that is also part of their responsibility. Like when they think a person's health, it's like, oh, that's the doctor's responsibility. Mm-hmm. Those things really fall outside of the doctor's office. I'm trying to figure out how we, if you have any like recommendations, and it doesn't have to be like right this minute, but if you have ideas on what we can do as a commission in like our final report, how do we do a good job of articulating that we need like a holistic approach, and that this is all of our responsibility, and not just like the social determinants of health don't just fall within those sessions where they go see the doctor. We need community-based support for a lot of these things. And I hope I'm saying this where you understand, because I feel like I'm rambling, and I don't have a firm.
I understand exactly what you're saying. So maybe I can actually comment to that. So I do think that part of it is an education on, people do think they come to the doctor and we're supposed to take care of everything, but we do have the ability to take care of that 20%, and that's new science. The other 10% is the physical and the built environment. So creating those cases to help them to understand that 10% is that physical environment. So if you have the ability to bring in urban planning, that's one of the things that we need to do to make sure that our city is walkable, to make sure that we're actually mapping out where our food deserts are, to make sure that we're doing an inventory of our corner grocery stores, whether people have access to healthy food or if they have access to some of the community gardens. But these social determinants of health are about 40%. And that has to do with people being able to get jobs, people being able to get training, people having access to the ability to do trainings. And then also when we think about there's 30% that has to do with our health promotion, whether or not people are smoking or drinking alcohol or have substance use disorders. But some of that needs to be brought into the educational system. We need to be teaching health literacy inside of our school system so that by the time people come out, that they really have a better understanding on how to navigate. So I think that if we create cases around each one of those different areas, it's easier for people to start to see their level of responsibility.
Let's see.
And I can help with those cases, Sunshine, if that's helpful.
Nope.
Yeah.
Not forward. Nope. Here, sorry. I don't know. Oh, I can't be good. Is it going to go that way? Oh, you're fine.
Do you have to go through the whole thing? Yeah, they're trying to find you. So you want to go ahead and start.
Oh,
Okay.
sure. So hi, how's everyone doing? I'll stall for a little bit. So my name is Tripathy. I'm a pediatrician by training, but like Dr. El-Amin had mentioned, I am a health equity data strategist, which is a fancy way of saying my life when I'm working in Dr. El-Amin's office, I look at ones and zeros. So I like looking at data, I like making maps, and I like looking at numbers, basically. So first of all, thank you to the commission, esteemed commissioners, Kelly, for inviting me here. This is super cool. So yeah, so this is a real treat for me. So thanks. So one of the things that Dr. El-Amin had asked me to talk about was basically the social determinants of health, but really more as basically looking at certain neighborhoods and trying to figure out exactly like what does that look like. This is probably a bus, huh?
It needs to be loaded.
Oh,
So. Needs to load this presentation.
Oh.
So they're loading it right now.
Yeah. So apologies. I think as I talk more, it'll make more sense to actually look at the maps that I created about like. So one of the things that we'll talk about is basically like I would like to go back to the history of Springfield, right? So basically looking at basically how the positioning of the railroads that we see in Springfield have really contributed a lot to the community that we live in now today, and basically decisions that were made back in the basically in Abraham Lincoln's time in the mid 1830s, and where the city of the center of the city is now, how that really affects how things look today. So as was introduced in the introduction, I'm not from around here. I grew up in a small town in Texas, and through what I would say a series of luck, I ended up with this really cool job here in Springfield, Illinois. So one of the things that I really enjoy looking at is talking to people about why Springfield is the way it is. And one of the more overarching things that I hear about a lot is, quote, the north and east sides are, quote, the bad parts of town. I hear this a lot, and as a quantitative guy, that doesn't mean a whole lot. There's this common trope in data science is you are entitled to your own set of feelings, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. So whenever people tell me that, I'm like, huh, that's interesting. Let's go back to the data and find out, well, is that true? And if so, why is that, right? So imagine you are someone in the mid 1830s, you hear about this town in Springfield, you hear about this whole railroad expansion project, you're like, oh, cool, I want to go make some money and support my family. So in the middle, so if you kind of go to the old state capital, right, you have the city center, and then when you think about the positioning of the railroads, you have the track, you have the you have where the Amtrak is, you have the Norfolk Southern that kind of goes on the east and northern side, and then you have the now decommissioned Illinois Central, which is where the kind of where that park is now, right next to the Abraham Lincoln Center. if you think about the positioning of those railroads, those are the three central railroads in Springfield that really determined where people lived at the time. So you had a whole bunch of people living in the middle of Springfield. And through a whole set of factors, people had to, unfortunately, African Americans were really pushed to the north parts and eastern parts of the city. And you saw a whole lot of white folks kind of move towards the southern part and more importantly to the western parts. So over the course of decades, this continued on over, that continued to move, that continued to happen more and more throughout the course of time. So then basically, as you think about where people live, again, you see a lot of African-American folks live in the northern part of the city and then eastern part of the city, and you see a whole lot of white folks kind of move towards the southern and western parts. So one of the things that we did for the last Kenny Brew session, we made this handout that kind of talks a lot about, okay, this is how things look where it is now. So I don't know if people have the handouts in front of them. Why don't, yeah. We do. Okay. You know what? I appreciate you. Thanks for saving me, man. All right. All right. All right. So I'm not sure if people have this handout. So we'll kind of work our way through this real quick. So in the very top part of the handout, there's something called a social vulnerability index, right? So what this means is, so basically how we define social vulnerability is just that. So basically how vulnerable that community is when you compare, so it's an index. So it captures a whole bunch of things. So it captures like your median household income, your education level, your level of poverty, early childhood education, things like that. So basically when you think about the hotter numbers, right, the numbers that are the yellow and the green kind of in the center of town, those areas are the quote more socially vulnerable, right? Those are the areas that need a lot more help. And as you can see, really in the north side of town, so everyone knows their zip code, right? So 62702 is kind of like the area a little bit north of here. And then as you go more towards the eastern part, you see it gets a little bit better, but not so much, right? So that's kind of what we think about. So when you think about an average SVI or a social vulnerability index, the average is around 0.7. So there's actually areas in Springfield that are like fairly vulnerable when you think about areas like that. When you start moving towards the western parts of town and southern parts of town, things get less vulnerable. So kind of moving on to the second graph. Okay, so when we think about like average per person income, so this is essentially is a measure of poverty. So when Dr. El-Amin and I decided to make this graphic, you may think $27,000 is kind of a random number, but that for this past year, that is actually per person. That's actually right at the poverty level. So when you think about the 62703 zip code, that on average, on aggregate, that area is living below the poverty level. And then you have kind of northern area in the 30 to 35 range, and then things get a little bit better as you move again towards the western parts of town and to the southern parts of town. So in some ways, there are some areas of town that are making double what certain parts of town people are making. So the next two graphs I do want to spend a little bit of time on. So as physicians, we think a lot about health outcomes. And I think the biggest health outcome that we can really talk about is life expectancy. A lot of the things, that's kind of the end goal. We want to make sure all of our patients live long, fulfilling, healthy lives, right? So whenever we think about life expectancy, this graph is a little bit dated. This comes from around 2015-ish data, but it's fairly consistent still. So when you think about life expectancy, if the average median life expectancy is 77, there are certain areas of town that are 5 years below that, and there are other areas of town that are like well above that. And again, there's a lot of things that come into that, but I think that part was really interesting. And the fourth graph you see here. So basically, this is looking at a neighborhood level graph. So when you can break down certain zip codes into certain neighborhoods, and in fact, there's an area when you think about to the northwest of where we are today, there's certain areas where the average life expectancy is around 13 to 15 years below what the national average is. And when we looked at I'd like run the code several different times and make sure that was right, because to me, like that was like pretty shocking. There's an area of Springfield where the life expectancy is almost a decade more lower than what we would typically expect in other parts of Springfield. And there are areas that are like much healthier in terms of like their life expectancy is much longer. So we thought that this was interesting, and I suspect my presentation is kind of a bust at this point, huh? That's all right. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So whenever you think about redlining, I do want y'all to think about like basically, because in the presentation we talk about basically the positioning of the railroads, and you can actually superimpose it on this graph, and it actually does follow pretty consistently. Where if you go even a little bit of east or to the west of where the railroads are, you can actually see these fairly large disparities in median household income, in life expectancy, and things like that. So I was talking with President Mahony. It's really interesting to look at basically these decisions that were made over a century ago really determine the health of our patients now, today, in terms of their life expectancy, in terms of median household income, in terms of just their overall general levels of health. So I thought, again, not being from around here and learning more about the history of Springfield and why things are the way they are, I thought was very interesting. I'm happy to field any questions on this or anything else regarding basically what do you think about geospatial mapping or anything along those lines? Yes, sir.
Abraham Lincoln going back to his time, location of the railroad.
Yes, sir.
Now, at one time, I see a lot of people running. They're probably getting a mic, hopefully.
I got all night. What you got? Oh, hey, look at
here
that.
we go. Okay, good.
I will fly through this, I promise. A lot of it.
You're up there now.
Yeah.
But dealing with Springfield,
yes, sir,
and populations, the immigrant populations in Springfield were in the 62703.
Yes, sir.
At one time, after 1908, along with the Black populations.
Yes.
Because after the 1908 race riot, it pushed the populations farther over.
Yeah.
And then you got that whole thing with flight.
So
where those populations moved out of 62703 and started going west and southwest.
Yes, sir. So again, I'm not a history expert, but correct me if I'm wrong. There's in the history of Springfield, there's two instances of white flight. So please correct me if there's in the history of Springfield two instances of something called white flight. So basically, like whenever you saw white folks leave the center of Springfield and move either west or south or things like that. So one was in the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, and then the second was in like the 1950s-ish with the construction of I-55 and I-72. That's a little bit beyond, but yes, that is correct. There are various instances in Springfield where you had concentration of non-white folks in the center of town / in northern parts of town, and other folks through economic mobility were able to move farther away. Again, not something a little bit beyond what I want to talk about, but you see a lot of pollution from the railroads and stuff that were mainly in the center of town. It is a well-known phenomenon that basically when you go to the eastern parts of a lot of industrial cities, fumes and other toxic pollutants are blown to the east, which is kind of why we see what we see now-ish. Again, I do some environmental stuff. Anyway, so that's kind of why we see concentration of certain populations on that side of town. I will quickly fly through this, and again, please ask questions.
You're fine. You're fine. It's our fault.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hello. I want to ask you what type of data you were able to collect.
Fantastic question.
On the food insecurity, and not so much on access and availability, but more on use, how people are interacting with the food. Are they eating and preparing the food in a healthy way? Are they looking at, like, I'm trying to address like people who have high blood pressure or diabetes in these zip codes. Did you see a prevalence of that? And then did you also kind of monitor the type of self-care like Dr. El-Amin was talking about that that the population utilized?
So I will probably defer that question to Dr. El-Amin. I think she'll be better to answer that question. That's not an area that I'm super familiar with in terms of like, so we have done like food insecurity mapping. There is a project in the Pediatrics clinic that talks about the question of food insecurity versus food running out. And fairly consistently, we do see it in certain zip codes and in certain races. But that's, I want to let the expert talk about that specific question though, if that's okay, ma'am. Great. All right. I'm sure everyone is, so just to kind of run through this real quick, I'm sure everyone has seen some version of something called a Hulk map, or basically the homeowners lending corporation map. Sorry, thanks. So I'm sure most people have seen some version of this map. This comes from Robert Nelson and Mapping Inequality. A whole bunch of people did this through a whole bunch of cities throughout the United States. So basically, like when this have a pointer to it. Oh, look at that. All right. So basically, this is kind of like the center of Springfield. So basically, in the northern parts of town and the eastern parts of town, these are the red districts, aka the hazardous districts. When you look at the composition of who lived there, as you may imagine, more African Americans lived in these areas. And as you move more towards the western parts of town and the southern parts of town, these are graded a more favorable lending locations for to loan people money, basically. So I do want to spend a tiny bit of time talking about this. So basically, these are 4 separate maps talking about where kind of things are. So for example, looking at if you were to use the Hulk maps and basically superimpose it on where we are now. So basically, again, this is the center of town. This is kind of where, this is 72, this is 55. So this is where we essentially are. This is the northern and eastern parts of town, western, southern parts of town. This is where the Norfolk and Southern Railroad, that's kind of like how it cut through town. As you can see, there is a western and an eastern part of the city. The old Chicago Alton / the new Amtrak, again, bisects the city, creating an eastern and western part of town. The now decommissioned Illinois Central Railroad, which is now, sorry, the name is blanking on me. Anyway, so basically this is now bisecting the city into the northern and southern parts of town. And if you were to put these in aggregate, this is kind of what, when you look at the positioning of the railroads are today, this is kind of the picture you look like. And again, imagine you have, this is the old Illinois Central Railroad. So basically you have very distinct in certain parts of town cutting, basically now you have a well-defined western part, eastern part, northern parts of town. So I do want to piggyback on what Dr. El-Amin had talked about. And again, I'm only going to present 5 social terms of health. We can spend all night doing this if we really wanted to. But I want to talk about high school degree attainment. And one of the things we're looking at in our office is over the course of history. For the purposes of our conversation today, this is over 20 years. And I'll talk about why we're looking at it in just 20 years. And for the purposes of this, to answer, ma'am, your question, this is all census data. None of this is SIU data. This is all freely available. We're not putting our thumb on the scale, nothing along those lines. And how we're defining high school degree attainment here is after the age of 25, do you have your GED or high school diploma? That's it. We're not measuring whether you graduated from 18. We know that people have certain circumstances. Basically, at age 25, do you have your high school degree? And as you may imagine, we looked at basically the mean for basically the average from 2000 to 2020. While slightly better, the same areas of town are still kind of the same. I thought it was pretty shocking that there are certain, so what we decided to do is decided to break it into four distinct parts of town, just to kind of, instead of like putting a whole bunch of colors on, basically we wanted to define it in 4 sections, so 4 quartiles basically. And on the whole, you'll see kind of the same patterns, but basically like the northern and eastern parts of town generally are the lower, we see lower degrees of high school degree attainment on the northern and eastern parts of town. And when you start going west, you start seeing people in like the 90s percentile. And I thought it was pretty wild that even today, there are some neighborhoods in Springfield that are only around in the mid 60s for that neighborhood of getting their high school degree. In terms of unemployment, again, kind of the same thing here. So basically the higher numbers the hotter numbers, that means higher unemployment. So basically, again, you kind of see the same general pattern. The northern and eastern parts of town, higher rates of unemployment than you do see in the western and southern parts of town. Same thing you see with poverty. I'm sure y'all are coming up with a theme here. But basically, like, again, the northern and eastern parts of town have higher rates of poverty. And again, you see these patterns reflected in both the year 2000 and in the year 2020. Percent home ownership, this was already referenced in another person's talk. I think Dr. Mahony, you spoke about this a little bit earlier. Again, you see in general, in the northern eastern parts of town, score lower than other parts of town. The last one I want to talk about is median household income. And the way we did this is, instead of adjusting for $2,000 versus $20, we did it on average of basically what the average person makes in Sangamon County. We took that as an average so that we can make apples to apples comparison. And again, you kind of see the same things we've been talking about. And again, this is already on the graphic on this handout. Again, we kind of talked briefly about this already. So this is something that we kind of talk about in our office pretty frequently, right? So this idea of structural racism, and I must admit, before coming into this office, this is a term that I heard before, but not really explicitly defined for me. And I think defining structural racism as the totality of ways in which society fosters racial discrimination through mutually reinforcing systems of housing, education, employment, earnings, benefit, credit, media, healthcare, and criminal justice. This is all to say that this is all pretty entrenched, right? I honestly thought when doing just a delta of 20 years, there would be some differences, but not really. So maybe I should not have been surprised at that, but I don't know. Anyway, so that is the end of my talk. So sorry about the issues. But again, I'm happy to field any questions about maps or data or anything else, how we got to this.
Any questions? Hello, hello. Yeah. Susan?
Thank you. Can we get copies of these too? I don't know about anybody else. I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed by the entrenched reality of structural racism. Anybody else? Anybody else need to stand up, take a breath, stretch, do something? Right. There's something about having the numbers in front of me that I'll tell you, the piece that caught my attention the most was the granular view and the life expectancy, and this one small neighborhood that has as much as 20 years lower life expectancy than other folks in town. And I know that, I mean, intellectually, I know that. Seeing it on paper helps bring it closer to home. Like, it's not just academic, it's not just out there, these are our neighbors. And one of the things that is important to me is that we as a society have made choices that create this result. This is not necessary. It doesn't have to be this way. We have chosen, we as a society have chosen for it to be this way. 2 years ago this month, there was research published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that proved that in what has been the richest country in the history of the world, poverty is the 4th leading cause of death. And poverty is a result of our policies. These are policy deaths. People are dying because of policies that we have put in place, which means we can also change the policies. There are days when I feel better equipped and stronger to take that on, and days that I feel less equipped, but it does not have to be this way. So thank you for highlighting those realities in our community.
What's up, man?
Mike, hang on 1 second.
I'm a loud guy. Okay.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I said.
Fair, yeah.
Side. When you looked into some leadership, did you guys look into like leadership in the city in relation to those zones, like as in how that disparity has continued for decades?
We did not.
Picking on your guys' data set, I totally understand in terms of the research, like the limitations of what you can and.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Just because it's something where growing up here, like that 03 is my zip code.
Fair.
You know what I mean? That's where I grew up my whole life. That's where I live now. And that data's stark. It's interesting to see it represented in hard data, what people that live there know. You know what I mean? Like, because it doesn't take and this isn't, I appreciate your work. This isn't a statement against it, but it doesn't take a data set to cross the street in this town from like 10th Street to 12th Street. I encourage you, if you haven't been to that part of town, just head over, like right down 11th Street, cross over to like 10th Street, check out Yale and 10th, and then cross over to like 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. And I mean, it's a visual disparity. And the city has engineered it for years. So it's something where we appreciate that data because it gives truth to what we know. What they've tried to deny for years, that there's been a systemic effort to make the east and north side of town look that way against the residents. So we appreciate that, because that's something where that kind of data matters, because those are our lives that are written down on that paper that live testament to it. So we appreciate that.
Thank you for the comment. Thank you for the comment, sir.
I have a question. Yes. So I, when was it, Ken? 2 months ago, that ACLU went to City Council to show the data, the disparities between police stops of Black and white drivers and Black and brown drivers and so on. And I think it takes strategy to show data like this, which is really hard to look because it's just in your face structural racism to our local government. I think that part of what we're doing as a Massey Commission and having these work groups doing this research and talking to the experts like you is also not keep it as the best secret in town. It's to strategize and take it to the local government and say, look, this bickering that you have going on for months to just fund a little bit every time another person that is representing the east side brings and say, hey, I need a little bit of money for this economic development, and all these other people are fighting for tiny amounts of money, it would be great to strategize and go and show this data so they understand that their decision-making continues to be to further reinforce this underdeveloped, at least economically, areas, right? Because this is segregation to the max, right? All these maps, what they show is segregation. So I think that initially Sunshine was talking about, why are we doing this in silos, maybe? And when we have the experts that are showing all this to us, and our local government is not granting funds for very specific things that affect these neighborhoods. So I just want to mention, it will be good at some point to strategize, to come up with the strategy to go and present this data to our local government so they have it. And I don't know if you've done that, but that could be a plan.
Yeah, so I think I would like to make, that's a great idea. I'm happy to help. I will say that when I think, so in my mind, I think about segregation and racism as two interconnected Venn diagrams. When I think about segregation, I think about the physical separation of peoples, but then racism is this like totality of ways that have been, that are designed to keep certain, Sorry, my bad. So I think about, so I'll start from the beginning, I apologize. So when I think about segregation and racism, I think of those as two interconnected circles in a Venn diagram. I think about segregation as separation of people, but then racism as this like, this concept that is designed to keep people down and continue that process. So I agree with everything that you're saying. And again, like in Dr. El-Amin's office, we are happy to meet with people, the Kennebrew community forums that we do every few months. I think, those are great avenues for us to meet with like-minded people such as yourselves and continue these conversations for sure.
Thank you. I also wanted to, it's not a question, but wanted to say that I think, with your permission, I think that we should include this data from even both presentations in our annual report that this group puts out, so that this all ties so much into all the work that we're doing. And it kind of shows this is why this needs to be done, because of this data right here. So if you all are comfortable and need to think on that, my request is that if this could be provided to us in a format with the credit of, who put it together so that it could be cited, blah, blah, blah. So that when we do our final report at the end of our time frame, when our 1-year report is due, that we can actually include this in there, showing that this is this supports the reasoning for the work that we're.
Yeah, if you want to send me an email, I have a card in my bag. So this presentation is over 100 megabytes. So that's just so sorry, this presentation is even though it's 10 slides, it's over 100 megabytes because it uses maps from statistical software. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to give you a much better, a PDF version of this. That's probably going to be more helpful to you. Yeah, just email me. I'm happy to send it your way.
Thank you. Question here. Hang on, we'll bring you the microphone.
Sangamon State University, before it was the University of Illinois, some of the faculty in the 70s did an extensive redlining study that is buried in the archives of Sangamon State, and it showed extensive redlining, and that was, I came in 77 and they had already done it, so it was somewhere between 1970 and its founding and 77, and that document probably shows, if you want a historical perspective, it's there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Brianna, right.
Thank you. You said you're not from here, right?
No.
Are you from a city that you would consider, well, most cities are segregated. What I'm trying to ask is, when you came here compared to where you're from, how did you feel as an outsider experiencing our segregation? Because I'm born and raised here, so to me it's normal. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who only know what it's like to be in Springfield segregation. So to hear that we're one of the most segregated cities, I know it because there's statistics, but I can't see it because this is all I know.
Yeah. So the answer is I feel like as a new physician coming to town, I came from St. Louis. I wanted to do well here. I wanted to impress my bosses and things like that. So my life was home, work, and that was it. I didn't have a ton of friends, and that's all I did. And until I really got into the EDI office, I really got to learn more about Springfield, go out and meet people. My friends now, in the first 3 or 5 years, I didn't really do much. So I can't really, I want to be honest with you, I can't really comment on what I noticed when I first moved here. But when I first got into the EDI office, this is fairly segregated from where I grew up. I grew up in a town called Lubbock, Texas, which is, I don't know if you know much about West Texas. It's fairly segregated, very much. So if you look at the history of basically so Springfield uses railroads for segregation. Other cities, this is a commonality to just Springfield. You see this all over the country. Probably the most famous example is in Washington, D.C. with the Anacostia River. The Anacostia River splits D.C. into an east and west side. But this, as you may imagine, redlining is not just unique. Even using railroads is not just unique to Springfield. There's a really interesting article out of Yale Law Review that talks about using man-made versus environmental forms of segregation. It's actually a super cool article. But yeah, so to answer your question, it is very stark, but not too different from where I grew up in Lubbock.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. I think that all of the presentations today really outline the need for work to be done, not only throughout this year, but further into the future. These maps and what you're showing us and all of the education that we've received tonight really outline that impactful change cannot happen within 1 year. This has to be ongoing work that the community is invested in, the city, the county, the people, everybody. We all need to be invested in this. So I thank you all for providing us with this education so that we can go out and move forward with this. And if there's any recommendations that you have, I'm one of the co-leads of the Community Education on Public Health and Safety work group, and I would be more than happy to discuss with you what you think we could do as a work group in terms of recommendations on how to make sure that the public is educated on this in general and how we can use this and the materials that you've given us to also educate people who are making decisions like you were talking about. One question that I've had, and this probably goes back to your presentation in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the just community health workers in general. I am wondering where you work, you talk about community health workers being utilized quite a bit. I'm wondering what the difference between the community health worker is and where you work and what a social worker is. And since community health worker is very much so new, where are they at now and where would you like to see that going in the future?
Yeah, so I think there's a huge difference.
Still not on. Here.
Still on. Good. Yeah, I think that there's a huge difference between community health workers and social health workers, social workers. So the social worker might actually be the person who is putting all the community health workers together. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to increase the numbers so that I would love if every patient, when they came in, they would have access to a community health worker to help them actually navigate. But the thing is that a community health worker is somebody from the community. You know, the social workers aren't necessarily from the community. They could be, but part of being a community health worker means that you are already a trusted person. And there's a great book called The Thin Book of Trust that says that there's 4 elements to trust: whether or not somebody is sincere, whether or not they care, if they're competent, and if they're reliable. And if one of those pieces are missing, people don't trust. And I think that that's something that's inherent when you have individuals who are from the community. So I do think that it is a science to it that we should be able to increase. And for my colleague here that was saying that it is very visible, I think it's very visible if you have people who come to the community and visit. You have groups of people who have not come to our communities. And part of what we're trying to do is to make the invisible visible in our office and to put it in language that people are able to the data says what's happening. But if people aren't coming to the communities, they're not going to be able to see it, and they're not proximate because the segregation index is so large. So thank you for saying what you said.
So right now, the community health workers are working in your facility, but would you like to see them in the future moving into the communities and being more community?
Yeah, so right now I work at a federally qualified health center. And so that is part of how we're doing our work. But Dr. Cruz, do you want to make a statement on that as well? So we're in the process of trying to expand.
Our community health workers started in the community, and a few have moved into the offices. But it's the way we were able to do our community engagement, our neighborhood assessment early. When was that, Wendi? About 12 or 15 years ago that it all started. And so, I mean, I'm happy to have more presentation about that too, because we had a big meeting on that today, what the future of the community health workers are and how we'll better able to use them too. So it's a big deal.
So I will put another plug in. We have a community health forum that is happening quarterly now. And so our next one is on May 19th, and the community health worker program will actually be talked about in that one. So we'd love for people to come to that as well.
And then you also mentioned resources that the community health workers have. Just wondering if you can think of any resources that potentially would be useful for the commission to have as a whole, or a work group to have, that would be useful to the community.
Okay. I'll go back here. Think about some of those things specifically, but when you think about a community health worker, a person is coming in, they may not have a job. That community health worker will sit down, help them actually apply for positions, help them to navigate through that situation. If somebody needs to get to a social worker or get to an orthopedic office, but the person doesn't have transportation, that community health worker is actually responsible for helping that person navigate through that transportation. So they're really doing the linkages to the resources to make sure that they have a holistic approach. Okay,
Dr. Wendi. So we have talked about how this perception or lived experience of not belonging affect people, life expectancy and mental health and so on. And I really would like to have more conversations with our healthcare providers that are looking into serving immigrant communities. And we have a combination of different communities in Springfield. We have people that have lived here for a long time and raised and built families. And then we have people that were subject to the temporary protective status and came 2 years ago under the Biden TPS policy. And they are suffering pretty soon, if not already, the cancellation of their TPS, work permit, and so on. So mental health is an issue for our communities that are immigrant, that are becoming, by a deliberate policy, undocumented as we speak, because they have a year and they will not longer have a work permit, right? So we have communities that don't speak English, don't speak Spanish, they speak an indigenous language, with kids that grew up here, are going to college and will be great healthcare workers, and that they need support to either go back to school or to get the training they need. We also need to have more language accessibility for these communities. And one of the things that we talk about in one of our last meetings was the fact that in the second week in February, as things were announced at the federal level, between 15 to 20 pregnant women in Springfield did not show up to their prenatal care appointments because they were too afraid. So we're looking into community health care workers going into those communities and do perhaps home visits. I don't know, but we need to take care of the people that are not going to the doctor because they're too scared of going to the doctor, even though we have sort of educated our communities to understand the Trust Act and what ICE is doing right now or not doing in Illinois. So I just want you to hear me say that because it's so important, and we want to support these communities in the best way we can, and we want to send a message that they do belong.
Yes. I appreciate you stating that. And the other thing that when we're thinking about trauma, we're learning more about this, is that when people have social threat, the body receives it the same way as physical threat. And that's where we're getting the weathering that people are experiencing. And we don't have enough mental health providers. So I think that another thing that we need to do is to do a lot of mental health first aid training and get people in the community to understand how to support in different ways. So thank you for saying that.
Okay. I'd like to take a minute to thank all of our presenters this evening. Very informative, very well received, lots of really good questions. Thank you so much for spending your Okay, at this time, we're going to get back to commission business. Every commissioner up here should have received in their board book a copy of the 6-month progress report. For those of you in the audience, as a commission, when we were stood up back in August, we were instructed that at the 6-month period, we would prepare a progress report, and then we will prepare another final report at the 12-month mark. And so we have completed our 6-month progress report, and we have to make a motion to approve that. But before, I want to know, do we have any discussion about the report?
I have a question. I kind of skimmed through it, so I could have missed it, but I wanted to ask whoever put it together officially. I'd sent an email asking that we include the information that we've been talking about tonight about the statistics on our city and how segregated we are, because I think that's important foundational information. I didn't see it in here, but I just skimmed through this quick tonight. So I just wanted to, before we vote to pass it, I wanted to ask, was it put in here? And I don't really know who to direct this question to.
Sunshine, it wasn't, because we're after the 6-month mark now. So the 6-month report just goes through what we did in previous sessions. You asked to have it in the final report, which we certainly can.
I wasn't asking based on the conversation tonight. I had already asked the question. We hadn't. I thought for foundational information, it would be good to have in there. It just happened to come up tonight as well. But I just sent the email when they were asking for like edits and things. So okay. But okay, thanks.
Okay. Any yeah, can it be added? Yes, it can be added. Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome. Kristen, did you have something?
Yes, the commission co-chairs, I just wanted to, Shadia Massey is still on there. Was that because she was still on at the 6-month point, or is she continuing to be an honorary member?
Yes.
She's an honorary co-chair.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes. Any other questions or discussion, comments about this report before we make a motion? Okay, seeing, hearing none. Susan, were you going to say something?
I did not send in my very few, very minor edits because I thought it was really well written. Who do we have to thank for that?
Rakisha was the main writer. There was input from others, though.
Okay, so hearing or seeing, okay. Can I get a motion on the 6-month progress report? Yes. Second? Okay.
That's with the addition that will be added, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Okay. Any new business before we go to public comment? Calvin?
And I'm going to make this public as well instead of just through the emails that we have. But, and I'm not 100% sure, but I would suggest and stress that our work groups start working toward making a recommendation that the Sangamon County correctional officers are wearing body cameras during their shift. And I state that because of the recent in-custody death that had actually occurred. They did not have a body camera recording of it. Instead, they had an overview, grainy video to whereas you really couldn't, I mean, you saw it, but you couldn't really see much. Plus, not only at the same time, but the body camera video, you would have been able to see that the correctional officers are going past the jail cells every 15 minutes and so forth. So if the work groups can kind of keep that in mind as you guys are kicking it up to the commissions, that should be definitely a suggestion, a recommendation, and possibly a recommendation immediately, because a lot of the lawsuits that has occurred from Sangamon County are in custody deaths. So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
I want to ask a follow-up question. Sorry, Bree, go ahead. Okay, I just wanted to, so I thought that that was part of the Safety Act, but they had a certain amount of time to get it done, but I'm not 100% positive. So my impression was that they may not all have them now, but by law, they will have to. And so I'm just wondering if if that is accurate, that they, according to the Safety Act, have to have them. They have a certain amount of time to get it done.
So in Illinois, every law enforcement agency is supposed to have a body camera on them. That is, the deadline has already passed. I forgot what the deadline is. But from my understanding, correctional officers are not required. When I reached out to Sheriff Crouch, and I'm going via email, she stated that sometimes the correctional officers will get them, but it's kind of up to them. So that's why I'm just stating that, a recommendation is that they definitely should have body camera on them as they're working. So
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I didn't realize that because I know when we met with Campbell before, I believe it was stated that they did have them. So I guess that was the loophole, that they do have them, but it's not. Okay, so good to know. Thank you.
And to build off of that, I know this is mostly county related, but Sheriff or Chief Scarlett is retiring. So they will be putting another chief in, I believe, at the end of the month. So tune into City Council and figure out who that's going to be, because that's going to be a big change for Springfield as well. You said June 1st. May 31st is his last day. Thank you.
All right, any other new business before we move to public comment? Okay, seeing none. Before opening the floor for public comment, I want to acknowledge the invaluable role of the community voices in this process. Your input is not just welcomed, it's vital to the commission. We ask that all comments be made in the spirit of productive dialogue. We ask that the speakers that have signed to be ready to line up in order of presentation. This is a one-way comment opportunity and not a Q&A for commissioner response. Each speaker will be allowed to speak for 5 minutes and will be called in the order in which they signed up. Our public comment period in total is limited to less than 1 hour. So let's begin with our first speaker. Thank you. Mr. Ken, thank you.
Spot I'm supposed to be at, or
No, you can, if you want to come up to the front,
sure, I mean, I'll take that. That way I can look.
or you have a seat, whatever you'd like to do. Yeah.
Informal. Well, hey there. First, I want to give a congratulations because Senator Doris Turner got a couple of the things you guys have been working on pretty far with the way the House is structured with the supermajority and the governor's support. Previously stated, I think you guys will get what you asked for. I do want to second Calvin's notion, though. I have been in our Sangamon County Jail, not many years, thankfully, but it was awful many years ago. Very abusive, very awful, denial of rights, access, phone calls, lawyers, slow down on bail. Did you know they can hold you for 72 hours without charging you? You find that out when you sit in a cell for 3 days. That's the kind of thing they do there at the county, and they've got double-digit deaths there over the last 15 years. The level of abuse and mishandling there is off the charts, and what fascinates me is that they do actually treat those deputies at the jail under a different level than they do the actual patrol sheriff. So keep that in mind in terms of like what they do say they're doing. Those are separate entities. Like with the DOJ, what they got the department to agree to, that doesn't affect those jail employees. So, I mean, that's where they kind of have a unique setup there. I do want to know with the numbers that were presented earlier, I think it's really dark. A lot of people ask me where I get the energy to be so upset and move all the places I go to talk to leadership. And I think a lot of that is because I grew up in that area code. It is one of the most historically and nationwide disparate areas. The life expectancy is low. I'm the only one in my friend group to achieve a higher education, to escape long-term incarceration, drug addiction, abusive family structures, and the litany of things that go with it. And I think what's frustrating is those interlocking systems that spent decades trying to hold people like me down are still very much in effect. And I really want to encourage the commission to start broadening their expanse. You guys have a mandate from the county, not just for county work, but this area is deeply, deeply neglected. The disparity is wildly off the charts, and what you see our city doing and our leadership all around is ignoring that. Literally just denying the fact that these disparities exist, ignoring why there's over-policing in certain neighborhoods, and the continual issue of if you start incarcerating teenagers, you're guaranteeing a lifetime cycle. The school to prison pipeline is very much well known around the country, and here in Springfield especially, where very often a lot of young black males don't even make it out of high school because they're not even allowed back on the grounds. They've been expelled, suspended, and punished out of that school to fit a narrative that's been very widespread for decades. And it's frustrating because not only are those things in effect, but the reason I want you to broaden your look is, I mean, like, go to District 186, they were just about to cut scope. That's over 900 children. Think of all those working parents. In a system right now where they've ended Head Start, fresh food from local farmers, and other programs like that, when we're looking at those kind of numbers, that's where those numbers come from. Those school districts that I grew up in that are deeply underfunded. Like, I remember very vividly going from public school and going visiting like SHG or like Calvary Academy and seeing the variance in like the educational access, just the building itself, the way students were treated, the way behavior was treated. Like, I remember the first time I didn't get punished for something that would have got me thrown out of school in some places, or like I went to college and I missed a class. I was terrified. I remember I got suspended for 7 days and locked in an in-house where they just lock you in a room for 8 hours. 8 hours a day just locked in a room. How many kids sit there like that? How many get discouraged and don't go back? And that's what our district still does to kids. And then they wonder why they're angry and they're frustrated and they don't want to come to class and they don't believe they're going to make it. That belief that you guys talked about with like educators, that's the kind of thing that made a difference. Like when I went to UIS in my late 20s, teachers talking to me and actually making it seem like it was worth my time as part of the reason I stayed and completed my graduate degree. And it's really important, I think, for you guys to take a look at those numbers that were presented tonight and think about expanding your mission and really consider what our city and our districts, school board districts and things like that have not been doing to confront those historical disparities that we know exist. Those numbers give reason to the words that many of us have said for years to our leaders, begged them for help. Well, they've ignored us or told us that we're over-exaggerating or it can't be that bad. But I wasn't kidding with what I said earlier. I live on 12th Street. I remember the first time as a little kid, I went over to somebody's house a few blocks away and I was just like my street alone has 3 SWAT team raids in the last 10 years. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to see that 2 blocks over even. So, I mean, it's just something to really consider when you guys think about your mission and like really expanding that. Know that those interlocking systems here in the city are very much at play. Like, go look at that ward map in comparison to those charts and you'll be shocked about who's been in charge the whole time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Zach Long.
How you doing, everybody? I'm on one of the work groups with the commission, so kind of been seeing everything from an inside look. You know, our last work group meeting, I'm on the law enforcement hiring and equity work group, and I feel like we had a lot of very good discussion because we had people to come and speak about alternatives to policing and certain things that I think a lot of people that probably looked against it probably have a more open, broad look about it. That's kind of what I was going to talk about, but just looking at everything with the presenters tonight, and I'm somebody who was fortunate to just live on the west side of town, like the old historic west side, because my dad didn't want me growing up in a disparaged neighborhood. And kind of like Bree said, you know, our segregation is normal. You know, I mean, you have the north side, the east side, and the west side. You know, the south side kind of coincides with both. And, you know, my father's from East St. Louis, and all you have to do is just go straight to St. Louis, and you will see the bridge and the train tracks that go and divide directly through. And you see nothing but dilapidated buildings, old churches. You got the police station right there, heavy and strong, right there in the heart of the community. And all you do, I saw a meme a couple of years ago, and it showed the pretty lights of St. Louis, the arch, all of this good stuff. And it says people don't see the opposite. And you look over the bridge and you see none of that. And that's, I mean, a mirror of kind of how Springfield is. And, you know, now we're starting to see a lot of that stuff get pushed to the old historic west side, as it even says on the numbers. Like, those things are starting to, you know, dissipate on that end. And all we're doing is just building more stuff closer to west, or out west, Chatham, Sherman, places like that, and just not doing anything. But seeing those things, you can kind of look at structural racism as how this is set up. We're talking about the disparities and the numbers, but look at where we're at. We're here in a nice area where ain't no drug addicts, no alcoholics, no corner stores. We're here where everybody's comfortable and safe. And maybe we need to hear from the community that's in the middle of the heart of the city where the chicken shack is, where everybody, I have a friend that lives on Stewart Street and he has 4 little children, and I see crackheads and all kinds of just poverty-stricken things. And I mean, there was a child, a little baby, that was outside for hours next door while their parents were in the house getting high. But nobody wants to talk about that. And we're here while that baby is probably being neglected in a nice area where everybody is comfortable at. So when we're talking about really wanting to look at that, maybe we should start holding things in the city. I have recommended us holding this at the Salvation Army many a times. That's right in the center of the hood, where all of these disparaged people are at, who we don't need numbers for. You can just go knock on doors or whatever door is there, because a lot of them are broken down. And there's a lot more community members here this month than it was last month, but still there's a lot of people not getting the message. There's so many people that are like, I didn't even know this was going on. You know, so I don't know what we have to do. Maybe we can get things to the work groups to have people knock on doors. Go make this more accessible for people, because obviously this is good things and it's not getting to the community that it's hurting the most. So, I mean, let's just be honest. Even if the community that we're talking about came out here, this room will not hold all of those people. It won't. Why don't y'all, I mean, like, seriously, why don't we go right down the street, Martin Luther King, go right down there. Go talk to the homeless person. Go talk to that drug addict that's shooting his heroin in his arms, and find out where he was or she was to where they are now. Like, we have to stop. Like I said, I am a kid from the West Side. Never done anything on the East Side ever, because my father just sheltered me. But I see what's going on. Like, it's very disheartening, because, like, I don't know. Like I said, I have friends, like Ken said, I have friends that are in the heart of that. And not just Black people, there's white people like that too. I mean, it's all like any trailer place that you go to. Now I DoorDash, so I see all of these places. I go to these trailer homes. You got nice ones, you got ran down ones. I mean, it's the same thing. So, but that's all I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Jacqueline.
Thank you. My name's Jacqueline Jarju. That was a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about. We talked about a lot of deserts today. We talked about food deserts a little bit. We talked about mental health deserts. We talked about redlining. Is one thing that I'm not from here either, one thing that I noticed in central and southern Illinois, that we are in a media desert. I am a journalist. I came here for graduate program at UIS that focuses on bringing communication of what's happening in government and around us, putting it into plain language and getting it out to the people. My internship was at NPR Illinois. One thing that I focused on in my internship was recidivism. But what I really wanted to focus on is what I saw in the community is, I like to say that people don't like police. officers, they don't like the police, and they don't like journalists. So what I saw was a lot of misunderstanding of what was going on, a lot of closed doors in my face when I wanted to just find out how different issues were affecting our people. So when I went into the schools, I noticed that there is no emphasis on digital literacy. This is a product of a media desert. And I'll define media desert as the lack of or scarcity of media outlets, professional journalists, and especially people of color. People of color do represent a nice percentage of the population here in Central and Southern Illinois. We're not invisible. I've been here 10 years now. I have some of my colleagues here and Mr. Stephen here. They're down, I believe, to maybe 2 journalists, aren't you? Just about 5 journalists that covers this whole area. That's not much. It's nothing here to attract people to this glorious profession. I'm gonna tell you that what we do is important. Why it's important? Let's talk about what is digital literacy. Digital literacy, as defined, is the ability to use technology safely and responsibly to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. The best skill, the most important skill, is cognitive reasoning. The ability to take that information, disseminate it, break it down, and understand it, and then you can come up with a solution. If we don't have that, how do you expect us to be able to rise above all of these problems you're talking about? We do need more community members here. We do need to be more active in the community, and you can't depend on 1 or 2 spearheads. You can't. But if you empower the people of all ages, from all backgrounds, to really understand that they have a voice, that they can do something about their situation. So what I did is I created a chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. Any city outside of Chicago, we are over. That's a lot. But when I really broke it down, it's not that many outlets, but yet it's a span. Every city outside of Chicago is under our jurisdiction, the National Association of Black Journalists of Central and Southern Illinois. And our goal is to expand digital literacy. Oh, I'm sorry. Our goal is to expand digital literacy in our communities. Now, how can we do that? Number one, we do need to reach the children. We need to reach them in their environment. Digital literacy is not one of the top. It's not even on the radar. You don't need to be digitally literate to graduate in any school here. And when he was talking about kids being kicked out, only until March of this year, up until March of this year, you could expel any child in the whole state of Illinois and not have any responsibility for where they go after. So what they were doing is expelling kids to streets, literally. I was flabbergasted. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which, you know, is big city problems. Sorry. And I'm going to finish this. I want to ask everyone to start thinking about how we are empowering our community to think for themselves. If we shut off media access, what we will have is even more desegregation in this community. We need to support our communicators. We need to have access to computers, know how to use computers, know how to look up. Somebody could give you something and it sounds like a fact. How do you look it up? How are you able to really see if something is true or fake news? Also, when people who are, I'm going to finish right now, but people who are become justice involved, or they have an issue, discrimination, or anything, there is little access to resources here. So we have the ACLU. They only could do so much. We have the Land of Lincoln public service for, they have few attorneys there. We don't have a lot here to help people. We have this gentleman here who helps people with FOIAs to get their information. How many people know that we could do that? We have to empower ourselves, and I believe journalists and communicators, PR specialists, all of us could help lead that way. So I really wanted to introduce the organization. We just got our chapter affiliation in February, and we're moving forward. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Brianna Eilers. Okay.
All right. So this is the first time that I've come to the Massey Commission meetings, and I honestly did not pay much attention to the meetings prior to. And I want to explain the reason being is because I had a lot of reservations whenever I saw how the county board was treating the recommendations of the Massey Commission. And so I hear that we have like a little bit of hope. And so I'm back here, or not back here, I guess. I'm opening my eyes to the Massey Commission. I'm giving the Massey Commission my time and my focus. So I just want to tell you guys that I'm appreciative that you're here. I appreciate everything that you did talk about. I know that I left for a moment, but I was still listening online. So thank you for putting them online as well. As for the East Side goes, I want to stress about the language that we are using whenever we are describing our fellow humans. When we are talking about disparities, we kind of get lost in like this title loop, I guess I'll call it, where people start calling other people names like drug addicts or homeless or alcoholics or anything of that nature. And we really need to stop that language. Reason being is because it is very important whenever they are in recovery. Because how are they supposed to keep on going in their recovery whenever other people are just like, well, that's an addict. That's an alcoholic. But that doesn't give them the chance to grow. And then also with the disparities moving over to the historic West Side, I want to give my own story as to why, because I am from Riverton. I come from white supremacy nation. I grew up and I was terrified of Black and brown people. I'm going to stand here right now and I'm going to tell you that straight to your face. I was terrified. You know why? I had no exposure. I had absolutely no exposure whatsoever. So I took it upon myself when I became an adult. I noticed where I felt wrong because whenever I was growing up, I went to church and I went to missions, and I had a lot of exposure whenever it came from the like Asian descent. So I realized that's where I was comfortable and that's where I needed to start. So that's where I started, and then I started branching out to everybody else's ethnicities and all of their cultures. And it is beautiful. It is beautiful to open your eyes, and it is beautiful to see those things. And I see now where the disparities, how they are keeping everybody in their space. Because I came from a family where at my great-grandma's funeral, they called my Aunt Polly a servant. My Aunt Polly was not a servant. My Aunt Polly was a slave. She was not there on her own accord. And that one word was enough to make me not talk to the rest of my family for 2 years now. Because my family has never supported me. My family has always thought that I've had this eccentric way of thinking that everybody belongs. And so instead of me changing myself, I changed my environment and I said bye to my family. So with that being said, going to the West Side, I grew up in Riverton. I was not in a wealthy family in Riverton. The wealth in my family dried up long ago with the Great Depression. And so whenever I moved up myself, I went to work. I worked really, really hard. I bought my first house whenever I was 23. I moved out to Auburn because I was like, small town living, I've got kids, I need them to be in a good school district, just to find out that they've got the same disparities in Auburn and the same issues, the same cultural issues that they do in Riverton. So what did I do with that information? I said, well, I don't have very much money, and I grew up as a Newt. I grew up as North End white trash. I was proud of being North End trash. Let me be clear. I told everybody I am a Newt, and I am proud of that, because I was I was in some deep things when I was growing up, and it was all because of the fact that I was a Newt. And so I took all of that information and I moved my family to the historic West Side, because that is the only place that I've found that I can afford that has some culture for my kids to experience. So the disparities that are going to the West Side are actually people who are searching out just a way to live, just a way to be where everybody else is. So how do we bring them up? How do we bring the East Side and the North Side up? I appreciate the fact that you guys are looking at that.
I don't have any other speakers listed. So we will move to the end of our meeting. This completes our evening. We thank you for gathering with us tonight and online. Our next full commission meeting is scheduled for 6 p.m. on Monday, May 19th at the BOS Center, room B as in boy, 11A as in Adam. Please stay tuned, masseycommission.com, for more information about this meeting and work group sessions that will also be scheduled. And now I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Kristen, second. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.